Welcome to the Mostly Pot Out at Night. Mostly, I am Salem, joined by my co-host Graveyard.
Hello.
This is episode 9 of our weekly All Things Horror podcast. This is part 1 of our 2-part series on the Hellraiser franchise. This episode will include the first 5 movies, which are the first 5 that Clive Barker actually had some contact with. The 5th one is very, very minimal contact, but at least they did, consult him a tiny bit. The remaining 5 after this, they did not at all. So it's our dividing line.
Yeah.
Okay. So we will discuss each movie as we go along here. I said we're doing the first 5. We'll start with the very first one, which is, of course, Hellraiser. Want to
yes.
give us the plot there, Graveyard?
Yep. So, the movie starts off, very kind of like orchestral ominous music. We see a guy sitting seems like he's living in squalor, sitting in a dirty mattress, and he has this box that he's working with, and he starts to open it. I think first you push the button on the side, then you take the circle and you kind of spin it around, and then it kind of opens up, and you see some blue glowing light and fog coming from behind the walls, like the old school wood paneling before you drywall it up, like the slates across of it. And then we see a whole bunch of hooks on chains attached to him in various parts, kind of pull him apart, and he kind of explodes. Or actually, it starts off with him getting the box from a guy asking what his pleasure is, in some other country. Then we go into that.
Yeah, it appears to be a shady Southeastern Asia market or something.
Yes. What is your pleasure?
Right.
And we go from there. So kind of a pretty quick death, in a horror movie, I think. Pretty gruesome first death, too. And then we find out that a man and his wife, Julia, are, have this house that was their, I believe, mother's. And they realize that is his brother, Frank, who was living there, and they don't know where he was. He just disappeared. They go around the house, and they're either going to move in or sell it. I think they're going to decide to move into it and kind of fix it up, and that become their house. And they start going through the house and realize that someone's been there, but it's been seemingly a very long time. There's rotten food everywhere, just garbage everywhere. Right. And then they go into where Frank was in his room and, find a mattress. And, they're moving stuff in. We kind of get a little flashback. And then movers come in. The dad helps the movers, who are not seemingly very good at their job, getting beers, and then kind of ogling Kirsty, the guy's daughter. I don't know how old she's supposed to be. I think she's away in college, so maybe 20-ish.
Yeah, probably.
She's not in high school. They start ogling her. Anyway, he cuts his hand, seemingly pretty deep and pretty well. Didn't seem like he would have. And they're just going through the house, and he drops some blood in this attic or crawl space that's just called wood. I think it's an attic at that point.
Yeah, it's an attic.
Yeah, and his blood hits the floor, and then he leaves, and then you see a really good practical effect of reverse melting of a body starting to come up from the ground. And then I believe once that happens, Julia goes in there at some point and realizes it's Frank. Somehow Frank came back from being torn apart. I believe then we get a flashback of the night before their wedding. Frank comes to visit and really interested in this, power woman of the 80s with her business suits, shoulder pads, and the whole 9 yards. Seduces her, sleeps with her, and there's this just lust between them. And we kind of find out a little bit too as Julia's going through his stuff that there's pictures of him with there's probably a dozen pictures, but to allude to that Frank strives for pleasure, and that he thought whatever this box was would be the next step in finding the ultimate pleasure for himself. And Frank is very bloody, just, no skin, partially skeletonized, that he realized, he said he needs more blood. He needs bodies. And so Julia starts luring men into the house and kills them in that room, so Frank is able to take parts from them and start kind of reassembling himself into more of a human form. And I think she brings about 2 or 3 guys all together. And then Frank's kind of whole except for his skin at this point. There's lots of kissing and stuff like that with Frank in bloody form. Like I said, really good special effects for this movie. And then, so, Kirsty finds out that, Julia's taking these men. She sees her taking some men in there and kind of spies them and realize that this is kind of going on, that, her Uncle Frank, she sees her Uncle Frank and didn't realize it was him at first. And then she tries to warn her dad about it.
I think she's just trying to get out at that point because I don't think her dad is there.
Right, but she wanted to get her dad out of there too. I think she realized that they're up to no good. That her dad might be part of it. That they wanted to kill her dad.
Right, which is why she eventually goes back.
Right, and she goes back to warn him. And then she sees that, it's her dad, but it's very apparent, like especially around his hairline, his hair on his head, that it's all crusty and bloody, and the what appears to be her dad is actually her Uncle Frank, because he says some things that's very reminiscent. It's just not acting like her dad. So she goes and opens the puzzle box, a little meant configuration. She said
that was before that.
That was before that. Okay, so she made a deal then, and this is kind of the first time we really see the Cenobites.
Right.
There's 4 of them, I believe, at this point.
Yes.
And she, they said, you open the box, we now drag you to hell. This is what we do. She goes, hey, somehow Frank escaped hell and is back, and the lead Cenobite, which we don't have a name for him at this point in time, we'll discuss this, we can say it now, it's Pinhead, but we don't get that until the second one, said, hey, instead of taking me, I will give you Frank. He escaped, and she had to prove to them that she was telling the truth. They didn't believe her, that no one can escape hell, no one could come back from this at this point in time. Then they go back, she sees her dad and realizes it's Frank. And then, does she call him at that point, or does Frank?
When they go back to the house, see that the interesting thing is it happens off screen, which is odd.
Yeah,
and it doesn't tell you right away what's happening. You have to pay attention. But yeah, they go back to the house and they're trying to that's when he's wearing the skin suit and all that stuff, and she's scared and running and hiding. And then as they go back in that attic room, that's when the Cenobites come back out. But when they're running around later on, you'd see Julia
off screen.
Because she's just gone at this point.
Yes.
You see Julia laying on the mattress, skinned, her skin is gone, and she's clutching the box. Right.
Right. Which there's really not much of an explanation that why would she be using the box? I don't understand.
I think because she got hurt, right? She got
Frank stabbed her.
Right. Yeah. She was near death. And so I think that she opened the box as kind of a final payback
to Frank.
Is what I think happened.
But she was skinned and on the same mattress that we saw Frank on, with all his pictures, just the squalor room that he was in, which they never cleaned up, which was very odd.
That's correct.
Yeah, and then so Christy gets the Cenobites there. Cenobites realize Frank is alive, and then you see your dad go through the same process, hooks throughout the body and kind of just gruesomely pulled apart. And that was kind of the... Was that... No, that wasn't in the movie.
No, then they were like, okay, yeah, we got Frank, but you did open the box.
Right.
So you're going to come with us anyway, even though that was the deal, but they were still going to get her anyway. And then she was, I believe she was closing, wasn't she? She was closing the box. And as she was closing the box, like as she went through each step on the box, like one of the Cenobites like disappeared in the fancy bad lightning that they had.
Right, yeah, the lightning happens every time you start to kind of open the box. There's a little bit of lightning effect every single time. But yeah, that's how they defeat how Chrissy defeats the Cenobites, is she closes the box, which is kind of a analogy for Pandora's box, I feel. And that's that was kind of the gist of the movie. I mean, there's a lot of good special effects. I know a lot of stuff was cut out from it.
The spanking was cut out.
The spanking and the sex scene between Julia and Frank. Clive Barker said he's only allowed 2 thrusts, and that's it.
Well, that's what the spanking was too. Yeah. Like originally, it was like it's supposed to be this like grand, elaborate like sex scene to kind of show why Julia was like so enamored with Frank. Yes. Like they kind of allude to like he showed her a new world, right?
Yes.
And then in the movie, it's just kind of, I mean, I guess it's, passionate, I guess, but like it doesn't, it doesn't look to be anything other than like vanilla. But yeah, in the original script, I guess it was a little bit more racy, and it was supposed to show that she was like, turned her vanilla world around, and that's why she was so like willing to do things for Frank. I mean, it still holds up anyway, but it would just put a little bit more background anyway.
Right, and I know they took out a couple of the hammer blows that she used the hammer to kill guys, and they took out like a couple of hammer blows.
Okay, because there was like scenes of like the hammer like stuck in their head.
Correct.
Yeah, and they were like, no, we can't have that.
And then Frank kind of exploding, wearing his brother's skin at the end. They heavily edited out, which is ironically because I think they show more of it in the second one.
Right. I think that's it's on purpose. I'm sure they were proud of that sequence. They were upset that it was gone.
Yeah, and I know Clive Barker got involved with this because he's written short stories. He wrote Hellbound, which is what this movie is based off of, as a short
Hellbound
story.
Heart, right?
Hellbound Heart, and he wasn't happy with other people that have done movies off of his short stories and how they did it. So he's like, I'll just do it myself, right? And that's why he kind of wrote and directed this one, because he wanted to do this one justice. At least he was hoping he was able to do it the way he wanted his stories to be told.
Right.
So, this isn't a first watch through for either of us at this point for this movie.
Correct.
What was your first thought? I know you saw this probably earlier than I did.
Yeah, I mean, the first time I saw this movie, I was like, I don't know, I was like 10 or something. I mean, it was like not that long after it came out when I watched it. And honestly, it blew me away. I mean, I know I've talked about it a little bit before, but it blew me away just with how much, like, I mean, even at that point in time, I loved like backstory and lore and like deeper, meanings and, things that are not directly told to you. You have to kind of, figure it out on your own. And this movie has a lot of that stuff. And it was really, like I said, it was really the first horror movie that I watched that had a little bit more, bite to it. There was a little bit more to it than just the surface slasher type stuff. There was like all this weird lore. And of course, I mean, the design of the Cenobites is just super cool anyway. So, as a kid, you're like, wow, those looks awesome.
I mean, I don't think you probably understood the whole BDSM part of it at that point.
No, not at that point. But I mean, they still look cool. You know what I mean? Like they're still wearing all like leather and latex with like metal bits and bobs and stuff. And it was cool stuff back then, man.
Right. I honestly don't remember the first time I saw this. I don't know if it's probably one of the number 3 or 4 that was on Sci-Fi at some point in time in the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
And they probably had the marathon. I remember seeing Pinhead at the video stores when they're renting stuff. That was kind of an iconic thing. But I didn't rewatch, I rewatched these probably 20-ish years ago as part of my franchise hunt. I mean, for me, it's not a typical slasher. It's not a slasher. I would never call it a slasher because most of the killing is not even done by the Cenobites.
Right.
They killed the same guy twice, and Julia, and that's it.
Right.
That in this movie that we see, obviously, they are alluded to being something more ancient, something more evil from hell, and probably in the rewatch. I know it's a lot of the leather BSM designs were cool. For me, for it being kind of an iconic character of Pinhead, is how little the Cenobites are in this. It was more. It was more of the idea of human lust, pleasure, pain, and the human part of it more so than anything else. And hell's just a part of that story.
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, it's just showing, the darker side of people and what they're capable of all on their own. It doesn't take hell to put them in that spot. They get more than capable of doing it on their own.
Right. I mean, it's not in my top 5 franchises. I mean, it's probably in the top 10, but this isn't something I typically rewatch a lot. I probably haven't watched it in 20 years. Or I may have watched it. I don't recall, but it's definitely not on my list of things I typically rewatch a lot of.
Hellraiser I have rewatched. I mean, a lot of times. Every couple of years, I'll rewatch it. I love the first one.
Did you read the Hellbound Heart?
No, I did not. I've read some of Clive Barker's short stories and novels, but I don't believe I've read that one. I probably should have.
Yeah, I think I read this in high school. I knew someone that liked Clive Barker, and they had the list of a book of their short stories. I'm pretty sure I read it then. I have not read it since. But let's get into the Cenobites and the lore of this, right? And Cenobites are the big. I wouldn't even call them big bad. I wouldn't even necessarily call them evil. They're just from hell, punishing people for doing this stuff, right?
I mean, in this movie, they're not really even punishing people. They are called.
Right.
Like the box is essentially like a phone calling them. They're like, I mean, they may be misled as to what it means, like what you're going to get out of the box, but they know something weird is going to happen, right? It's like the ultimate, pleasure, pain experience. Like, obviously, something weird, bad is going to happen. So, I mean, but they're called, and that's the cool thing is they follow a rule, right? It's like whoever calls them, it's fair game. They can do whatever the fuck they want to that person that calls them and actually does the box,
right?
But they don't go after anybody else.
All right, they just you open the box, whether you know what you're doing or not, it doesn't matter in their eyes. They're just called. They're here to pick you up and bring you to hell. That's it.
Well, I mean, they don't really get into this one, but the second one does get into that, and that is actually different in the second one. But like I said, it doesn't really come up in the first one as to what that rule is, but because the people that open the box open it for a reason in this movie. So
right. So, what did you think of the Cenobites? We have Pinhead. We have what do you want to call her? Open throat lady. With her throat
she's just credited as female Cenobite.
And then we have the Chatterer.
Yeah.
And then we have Butterball. Yeah. Right.
I mean, they're awesome, man. I mean, they're cool looking. I mean, they sell the whole movie. I mean, you could literally just put a picture of those on a cover of a movie, and I would definitely watch it. I mean, because they're cool. I mean, Butterball's got those weird glasses, and he's like, obviously a heavy set gentleman,
right?
But then, like later on, he takes the glasses off, and he's like his eyes are like sewn shut. I mean, there are just so many weird things. Where the lady has the hole opened up in her throat, and she like smokes through the hole, and she's got like all these weird guitar string things all over her shoulders and stuff. They're like holding her head up and like keeping her head at tension, and
and
the Chatterbox guy doesn't even have eyes. He's just like all teeth, and he's like constantly chomping on them.
Right. It reminded me of the wind up teeth that you were able to do. That's the sound that he made as a chatterer. And Butterball wears like Morpheus from Matrix glasses on a giant head.
Yep.
So, I mean, I think this is a good introduction to the Cenobites, to the lore. I mean, there's so much to it. You don't really get any information about them other than they're there to do a job.
Right.
And,
I mean, like, Pinhead doesn't even have a name or anything at all.
Right.
Like, he's literally credited as lead Cenobite. I mean, that's it.
Right. So, I mean, like I said, on the rewatch, I think it was better. Like I said, I hadn't rewatched in 20 years. I thought it was good again. Like, I enjoyed it more, I think, this time than on the first time and the franchise watched 20 years ago. I enjoyed it more. I think I understood more of it. I understood more of Clive Barker this time, in the past 20 years, and read more about it. So I appreciate it more on the rewatch. But for you, what would some highlights be? Just the design?
I mean, the design of the Cenobites, I think, is number one for me. It's just they're just cool. They really show you that these are like people that you should definitely be afraid if you see them, right? Something very bad is going to happen to you if you walk into a room and these people are there. Like, these are not kind people that are going to do fun things. This is bad news. I mean, the practical effects in this movie are amazing. I mean, they are great. I mean, all the body, like, skeletal stuff where he's coming out of the floor. I mean, him just in the skin suit, with the blood everywhere. I mean, they look great, fantastic. The Cenobites look cool. I mean, all those effects look awesome. Like I said, I think it's just very well made.
Would you say that they are the best looking, I'll use air quotes, villains in a horror movie?
Yeah, I'd definitely give them that. Definitely the best dressed.
I mean, because Michael Myers, nothing special about him. Freddy, he has a burnt face and a glove, but his costume isn't anything. Jason, you barely see his face. And as far as major creatures, if you will, that aren't human, they're humanoid, I mean, I can see why they probably don't have them on as much, because there's a lot of practical effects and makeup that goes into it. I don't think they could have them in that the entire movie. So using it sparingly, I think it was a better way of utilizing it and just kind of showing that, and just makes it better as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't be afraid of Pinhead following me around. I'd be afraid of Pinhead or the Cenobites coming after me if I do something like open the box. But it's not something that you have to look over your shoulder. It's kind of like, hey, you do this and you're pretty much dead, right? They don't mess around for the most part.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, practical effects is amazing. Like I said, I don't think any villain has, I mean, xenomorphs, but the aliens aren't in it as much. You don't see the Predator a lot either. The sparing use of it, I think, was a good highlight. What about any low points?
I mean, I love this movie. There's not many low points for me, but I think the low point, especially on the rewatch, is that lightning effect. That lightning effect has not aged well. It does not look great. It looks very old. Like, everything, all those practical effects look amazing, stellar, right?
Yeah.
And then you get this lightning that comes in, and you're like, wow! You just get teleported back to 1985. It's like, wow, this is just this is terrible. But I mean, I guess that's what they were working with at the time, and that's fine. But yeah, it just on the rewatch, that really dates it. Everything else is great. That weird lightning effect, which they put in a lot of stuff, is just dates it.
I mean, I agree with that. I mean, lightning, it didn't bother me as much as other things that happen in horror franchises, like Phantasm with the weird mirror crystal thing, purple thing. We'll have to discuss on those rewatches. I mean, lightning was on par with, I think, the special effects of Ghostbusters.
I mean, at the time it was fine. I'm just saying, on the rewatch, it's not great. And again, that's the low point. It doesn't bother me that much either. It's just, if I have to come up with a low point in this movie, that would be it.
Yeah. I mean, even the box was a practical box. It's not like stop motion. It was like, maybe it was stop motion, but it wasn't like computer animator attempted to do it at that point, which would have been horrible, I think, for 1988 to do that.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, yeah, low point, other than I don't understand why, Julia was this amazing woman that Frank would desire, considering he's been through all this stuff. I don't get that point.
I think it was more of a domination of his brother thing. I don't think it had anything to do with her.
Right.
I think he wanted to show up, and bone his to-be wife and then leave with the satisfaction knowing that he can do that. Because it didn't sound like that him and his brother had a good relationship. We don't really see the relationship between them at all.
Correct.
Yeah, I mean, the only time they're together is they murder each other, and that's it. There's no like interaction. But yeah, I mean, the way that he was talking about Frank in the beginning, yeah, I don't think there's no love lost there. I mean, I don't think they liked each other, and I think that he was like, maybe paying him back for, their childhood or something like that. He showed up when he knew he wouldn't be there.
Yeah.
He seduced her to just prove that he could, and then he left. He obviously had nothing to do with her after that because she, was still pining after him after she saw him. But obviously he was gone and he had no other part of that. He just showed up and did it because he could, because he wanted to show up his brother.
Okay.
I mean, he didn't tell his brother about it, so he wasn't bragging about him. I think he just wanted to stick it to him, for his own satisfaction.
Right. All right. So our scale for this episode, next episode, are going to be the number of lament configurations out of 10. Correct. So what would you give this out of 10? 10 being the best, 1 being the worst. What would you give this?
I will give this movie a 10 out of 10 lament configurations. Okay. Just because this is one of my very favorite horror movies, especially in this franchise. This is the first one. I'm going to start out strong, and this is, fantastic.
Yeah. If we're doing us on a scale of this movie and this movie as a whole, I would give this a 9. Like I said, the rewatch really made it for me, I think, on this. I didn't have the biggest love with this franchise, but the rewatches of these, especially the first couple, are amazing. So I'll give it a 9. So, you want to go ahead and talk to Hellraiser 2?
Hellraiser 2.
Hellbound.
So the plot of this one opens up like literally the same day as the ending of the first movie. And the first movie, I guess we didn't mention it, but there was like a weird boyfriend that she had in the first movie. He was a very, very minor character, didn't really do much, but he did go with her back to the house when she went to like confront Frank.
Oh, the dinner party guy.
Yes.
That she was drinking wine with, yeah.
Right. Again, a very minor character. He didn't do anything. He was just a partner there, but they do show him in the beginning. He's not really in this movie either, but essentially he brings her to the hospital after that whole thing because he saw some weird stuff. She saw some weird stuff. They went to the hospital, like trying to explain this weird stuff. And so, of course, they just lock her up in a mental institution, right?
Yeah.
Because, I mean, if you're talking demons that are coming out of a box and your uncle is wearing your dad's skin, you're going to get put into a mental hospital, and that's what she does.
Right. Probably rightly so.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you hear that story. Yeah. You put them in a mental hospital. No one is going to make a judgment call on it. Everybody knows that's the right place to go.
Right.
So anyway, so she's in this place and there's this doctor guy who's like very proper, very English doctor guy. Who's like trying to discuss with her what she saw. And she's like, describing what's happening and, going all this kind of stuff. But he seems like very, very interested. And then he leaves. And she talks about, because Julia, as we said, Julia died on that mattress, right?
Right.
And then later on, I don't know why how did she know that the mattress, maybe that was just a plot point they injected in this. Anyway, she somehow knew that mattress was just like the attic. Well, I mean, like she really didn't know about Frank either. I guess they kind of a little bit of a plot hole to where how she knew that stuff because she wouldn't have known it.
Right.
But anyway, So anyway, so she kind of knew about the floor and how Frank came back from the blood. And so now she knew that Julia died on this mattress from the box, so that Julia's body is not there, but the blood is on the mattress. So if there's blood that gets splashed on this mattress, she's going to come back. And she's telling the doctor and the police, hey, you have to make sure that, no blood gets on this mattress. Make sure that it's destroyed so that she can't come back. And of course, they all think she's crazy, whatever. And they cut to the doctor stealing the bed and bringing it into his house. And he's obsessed with the box. He's got multiple boxes. I'm guessing some of them were reproductions or something.
Yeah, there's at least 3 that he had.
Yeah, there's at least 3 of them in glass cases. He's got all these etchings of the boxes all over the walls and all this obviously he'd been researching this stuff for a very long time. So he gets the mattress, and he, brings it to his house. Somehow, Lieutenant Gorman, I say that because he's from Aliens. The lieutenant from Aliens is his assistant.
Okay.
The doctor's assistant.
Yeah.
So yeah, he feels bad for Kirsty, and he kind of believes her. So when he sees that the doctor is acting goofy, he goes to spy on him to see what's going on, or he goes to break into his house to see what he's up to, or some nonsense like that. So anyway, he's there. He witnesses all this stuff. The doctor brings in, the mattress, the bloody mattress, into this, kind of a shrine to the box. And he ends up bringing in one of his patients, because they showed this underground patients ward that he has, which is all these crazy people, the kind of cut all over yourself kind of crazy people.
Yeah, the guy that believes he has bugs coming out from his skin and on his skin. Yeah. Right.
So he takes the bug guy, who, I'm guessing he thinks no one's gonna miss, and he brings him to the mattress, and he's like, oh, you need help getting all the bugs off of you? Here's a knife, So of course he starts cutting all over his body, right? And he's bleeding all over. So the doctor didn't actually get his hands dirty, but this guy essentially, cut himself all open. Blood gets into the mattress. Julia comes out of the mattress, just like how Frank did from the first one, right?
Yeah.
So Julia comes back. She explains to him, hey, you're going to need to, bring a whole bunch of bodies here. I'm going to need to absorb them and get my flesh back, whatever. So he brings her some bodies. There's weird scenes of him wrapping her in bandages and stuff and all this bizarre stuff. Anyway, so after they don't say exactly how many times, but they show a few people. She's back and she's got her skin and she's fine. And again, and everything, right?
Right.
Yeah, and I'm okay. Now, how did Kirsty get into that house? Did he just bring her from the hospital, or did they sneak in?
They snuck in. She went with the doctor's assistant.
Yeah, right. Because Gorman, right? Yeah, Gorman got out. He went back and told her what was going on. So then they came back to do something about it.
Right, because he witnessed the events.
Right. So yeah, they come back to do something about it. Gorman is gone, almost immediately. There was another autistic girl that was another patient at the psychiatric hospital. She has minor kind of interactions with us. She doesn't talk at all. She just plays with puzzles and stuff like that. Or
she's really good at puzzles. Yeah.
Right. And again, this is another instance. Like I always say, there's so many movies that whenever there's somebody that's autistic or something like that, they always have some kind of secret skill, right? Some kind of secret power. Every time they're in a movie, they do that. And it's not fair to these people that in real life, everybody's oh, so what do you count cards?
Right.
Are you really good at puzzles? And it's just, I don't know. It's like a superpower in movies. It's a cheap cliche. Anyway. So he ends up bringing this girl, to his house to open up the box so he doesn't have to. Right. Because they're trying to find out what's on the other side because of Gus. He's obsessed with this box. Right.
Yeah.
So he brings in the girl to open up the box so he doesn't have to, because he knows that whoever opened up the box, bad things happen to him. He knows that much. So Kirsty and him come back to stop them. They end up seeing the room of all the people that Julia has killed, and there was at least like 15 people in there, 12, 15 dead people.
Yeah, all chained up.
Right, yeah, all chained up, all like drained. Like obviously she took them all. So yeah, it took that many people to get her skin back, apparently. So the girl, they all hide. Like they go in like another room and they're looking through like a one-way mirror, a two-way mirror to watch her open up this box. And she opens up the box pretty easily, right? And then the Cenobites come, and then they go, oh. What is the line that he said? It's hearts, not hands, that bring us here.
Yeah.
Meaning that, like, yeah, she opened up the box, but she didn't open it up for the reason that people normally open up the box. She only did it to solve the puzzles. She wasn't looking for pleasure and pain or anything like that. So they just like immediately just leave her alone, and they start like looking around the house, I guess. But like as they do so, like a doorway to their world opens, right? Just kind of like it opens up a section of the wall, and it's kind of like a portal into their world,
right?
And so everybody kind of goes into this portal, and it ends up looking like an Escher painting, right? So where it's like this, they do the shot a lot of times where they show like the people walking in like the very lower left corner of this big matte painting.
Yep.
And it's just like this big like Escher like labyrinth. I mean, it's just like stretches on forever. It's like, I guess this is what hell is supposed to be, right?
Yeah.
And over it there's like this big kind of like a squished version of the box. Like it's kind of like a lighthouse in the middle, and it's like spinning around, but instead of light it's like a dark light, like a darkness house, a dark house. Instead of a lighthouse, it's a dark house.
Yeah, it almost looks obsidian in nature-ish with like a light platform, if you will. Like if you had the light bridge, it's dark lighthouse. I like that. Right. And they end up calling it Leviathan. Like I don't remember who says it. I think Julia says it later on that's Leviathan. And that's the reason why she was able to go back. She didn't sneak out like Frank did. She was able to go back because Leviathan wanted her to go back. Right. But like, there's nothing ever said other than that's Leviathan. That's like, this is like his domain kind of thing. Right. That's about it. Yeah.
So yeah, as they're going through, they end up into like this kind of open area, where of course they're trying to, get Kirsty. They're trying to get the girl, the autistic girl, Julia and the doctor guy are all in there. And he ends up getting kind of betrayed. The doctor guy does, because he thinks he's going to like, give this sacrifice to them and they're going to give him magic powers. And they kind of do, but not in the way that he wants. Like he ends up falling into the box, like a weird big version of the box. And then he gets like all these wires like pulled across his face.
Yep.
And then he comes back as a Cenobite with like all these weird wires pulled across his face. And he's got like this weird, like, I don't know, it's like a sandworm looking thing like attached to his head. And he's not like, he doesn't walk around. He like floats around because this sandworm thing is like holding him above the ground. It's
like a sandworm, but with like the matrix needle that they plug in the back of their head stuck in the back of his head.
Right. Yeah, it's like bizarre, but it looks like it's constantly causing him pain because the way like he talks and twitches and stuff, like it's kind of like insinuated that this thing's like mixing up his brain or something. But yeah, anyway, so like, he's like, he kind of like takes over, as like being the bad guy chasing them around, and they end up like going through the labyrinth. At some point they end up going back to the hospital, but it's like a version of the hospital that like he made. So he like killed all his old patients and stuff. And stuff, goofy stuff like that.
He had them open in boxes. Limit configurations. Well, yeah,
he had the patients, right. Yeah. So like, so they're all, dead, and there's hooks and chains and everywhere from all the Cenobite murders.
Right.
So Kirsty and this girl end up going through, and they're looking through his old like notes and stuff, and they end up finding a picture of Pinhead, but it's Pinhead back when he was like a normal person.
World War I.
Yeah, he's a World War I officer.
Like a officer, like a pilot. It seems like
he's an infantry officer, but he's So they find out, that the, Pinhead was a guy at one point in time, and that he opened the box and then he became a Cenobite, kind of like how this doctor guy became one, right?
Right.
Kind of the same kind of thing. So anyway, so they go back into the labyrinth again. And they end up meeting up with Julia, who's trying to, I guess, what was she trying to do? She was trying to like make them like trying to like sacrifice, like she had to bring back souls for Leviathan. That was the reason why he let her out.
Correct.
So she was just trying to bring back souls. And I think maybe did she have the autistic girl? I think that's why she came back. Why Kirsty came back?
Yeah.
Yeah. I was trying to think. There had to be a reason why she came back in. So yeah, I think she had the autistic girl. Anyway, so they were like fighting, and then there's like a weird void that was like sucking in all the air, and they were like holding on for dear life kind of thing. And then her and the autistic girl survive, but Julia flies into the void, but like her skin gets like peeled off. It comes off like a glove, like the whole thing. Anyway, and in this, the autistic girl eventually figures out that the box can also transform into like this weird dagger looking thing. And then when it transforms into that dagger looking thing, it looks just like Leviathan does when it's floating up, like its dark lighthouse, right?
Yeah.
So they end up going back to the center area. And of course the weird creepy doctor guy is there. And they're kind of like having this showdown thing. Kirsty gets like thrown against the wall and knocked out. And then the girl is like trying to, have like a standoff with the doctor. And then Julia comes back, and she like convinces, so yeah, Julia comes back. She kind of like, soothes the doctor guy, that, they're gonna, whatever, rule the world together, whatever nonsense they were saying. So she goes back and, ends up, betraying and killing the doctor guy. And you find out that it was Kirsty that went back and got Julia's skin and put it on.
Right.
So yeah, so she, we don't find out that she's saving the autistic girl. She's falling, and then she like, goes to hold her hand, and she's pulling her back up, and then you see like her, skin get torn up and stuff. It's weird looking, but anyway, so yeah, they save the girl. They get out of hell, more or less. Movie over. Everybody's happy except for all the people that died.
Right.
Which was a lot.
Right. Yeah. And essentially, the Leviathan became the box then in the center. Because I think she folded up into Leviathan shape and then folded back out, and it was like forming a box.
Right, but yeah, she folded into like that weird like knife configuration, and that knife configuration was Leviathan.
Yeah,
or at least it looked just like it.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting. I mean, we also see a brief glimpse of Frank again in this, in hell, and we saw him trapped in hell, and like why he was there and trying to get out of it too. It's almost like they were almost like a little bit like they're going through kind of like rooms of hell, that each person's own personal hell at some point, like just a couple of people.
Right. Well, yeah, because Frank's hell was that there was like all these like moaning, writhing women on all these like weird slabs underneath like blankets,
but he couldn't touch them.
And then when you pull the blanket away, there's nothing there.
Right.
Or when you pull the blanket away, there's like blood everywhere. Like whatever it is, you can't. So it's like they're constantly teasing but never following through. So yeah, that's his hell, Mr. Pleasure.
Right.
It's his hell. Right.
Yeah. So, I mean, what are your first thoughts of this? I mean, did you see this shortly after when it came out too, after seeing Hellraiser?
Well, yeah. Here's the funny thing. I never watched this movie because I thought I already did. Like, when you watch the first one, there's like, minor scenes of her in the mental hospital, right?
Right.
With like that weird, like she goes into hell a little bit, and there's that weird monster that like crawls along the walls, that like scares her out kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I thought, for whatever reason, that was 2, or I thought that was from 2, so I just assumed that I'd always watched it. But as watching this, I was like, I don't remember any of this. Like I didn't remember like the big Leviathan labyrinth. I didn't remember all that kind of stuff. I think I just didn't watch it. I think it was because when I looked at like, you know, the back of the box or people talked to me about that movie, I assumed that I did see it because of those parts. You know, I'm like, oh, the part in the mental hospital. They're like, yeah, it's in the mental hospital. Like, okay, yeah, I've already seen it. Like, I thought I did, but I guess I did not.
Yeah.
Oh, and the other part that I left out, that I guess kind of is important is that, yeah, she finds out that Hellraiser or that Pinhead is a normal dude, and then when she goes back to and she meets up with Hellraiser again or Pinhead again, she tells him that he's a real guy, and he like didn't believe it. He's like, no, I've always been a demon. But she convinces him with the picture and stuff like that. You know, you were a guy first, like that's what happened. And so like eventually, and he like actually like morphs back into the old captain guy,
right? And don't they all they all morph back into their human forms?
Right, but they're all when they die.
Yeah, right.
When they get killed. So yeah, the original Cenobites were in this. So like Butterball, Chatterbox. The female Cenobite was in it. It was a different actress, which was kind of off-putting, but she was in like the same basic outfit. So I think it was supposed to be the same character.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, still this female Cenobite. Yeah,
right. Yeah. So it was like, yeah. So they got like, you know, confronted by the doctor guy, and they got killed because he was going to take over.
Right.
And he essentially did. And he killed the other three, and then Pinhead was fighting him, and that's how she was able to like let Pinhead get away. Was she told him about that, and then he like morphed back into his normal self, and then just kind of left.
Yeah.
But it kind of freed him, which I guess opens it up for 3 later on.
In a way.
Well, it makes the things that happen in 3 make more sense.
A little bit. So was this your first time watching it all the way through then?
Yes.
I mean, how do you feel this compared to the first Hellraiser? I mean, we watched them then, you know, past week, fairly recent, you know, close to each other. How do you think it stood up? Do you think it was a good follow-up to the first Hellraiser?
It was. I mean, it was made, I mean, basically like within the same year. I mean, it was made very, very close. It was like all the same people.
Right.
I mean, not only, you know, actors and actresses, but also the crew, the filmmaker, everything was the same. The guy who directed it wasn't Clive Barker directing it, but he was the assistant director to Clive Barker in the first one. Clive Barker was heavily involved. He wrote the script. I mean, like, you know, everything, it was basically the same people. So it was basically just an extension on it. And you could tell they had a little bit more creative freedom in this one because they were able to sneak in a lot more, you know, blood and guts kind of thing. And like you said earlier, they even brought back scenes, you know, like him getting pulled apart. They brought back the scene that was originally cut out, and they brought it back and showed it again.
Right.
The real version that they wanted people to see.
Yeah, because like part of his brain was like goes against the wall. It was more visceral in it.
Right.
I mean, so would you consider this, you know, we'll compare the Halloween 2, the same night type scenario, even though it's like a year or 2 later, it's still the same night. It feels like it's just a good continuation of the first one.
Correct. Yeah, like this one is like Halloween 2 is a bad follow up to a great movie. I think this one is a great follow up to a fantastic movie.
Okay. I mean, I like Halloween 2, but we'll discuss it when we get that franchise.
I know, but it's noticeably worse than the first one is.
I'll give you that. You know, so this wasn't my first time. Second time might have only been my third or fourth time on these Hellraiser movies. And rewatching these, I agree. It was a good follow up. I think it was a good dive deeper into the world of Hellraiser. I'm always intrigued with, you know, especially when they show the 3 different boxes. Were they replications? Were they different boxes? Because you'd think there'd be more than one box. We don't know enough about the lore in this, but you think if these are demons and if Leviathan wants souls, that there'd be more than one box created. And it makes sense the guy collected all the boxes, and maybe they do different things. I don't know. We haven't watched the last 3 movies. So far we haven't really seen that get dived into.
Yeah, not really. I mean, because as we'll see as we go along here, after the fourth one, they just kind of abandon
Right.
all the lore. I mean, we'll get into that, but yeah. So like the first four have some lore. The third one is pretty light on that. I mean, there's a little bit,
Right.
but it's more just like a rebirth kind of thing. But
Yeah.
the fourth one has a lot.
Yes.
But
so, like I said, this is your first watch. Like I said, rewatch. I think this was, like I said, a very good follow up to the first one. I was really surprised by how good number 2 was, honestly. So Cenobites, we get the same Cenobites. We get, like I said, we get more deep into the backstory. We get the lore that they were once humans. This is the first inclination that they weren't just pure demons from it. How do you feel about the lore expansion in this movie, that they go to hell essentially, or the hell dimension?
I mean, I thought it was pretty awesome. I mean, it was, like the whole Leviathan thing, which they didn't really expand on. They just kind of expanded on like the Leviathan was like, the ruler or god of this little section of hell, right? I mean, that was it. There was no like interaction with Leviathan. It was just there. I mean, the only interaction they had was like when that dark light like went over people, it would like showed them like horrible like flashbacks of like their own terrible life or whatever.
Yeah.
But that was it. That was the only interaction with it. So it was obviously like, a kind of like an essence of pure evil type thing, but that was it. I mean, yeah, there's just a lot more. It's like you actually get to see inside of hell. You get to see how the Cenobites are created, that there's like infighting between them. I mean, yeah, there's all kinds of stuff that you get to see. And it's interesting. They don't answer a whole lot of questions, but there's a whole lot of extra fun stuff in there.
Right. And I know that, with this movie that, Julia came back, and that the idea was that she was going to be kind of the main antagonist, the human antagonist, or I guess undead at this point in time, antagonist, and that, Kirsty would be kind of the protagonist of it. But as we discussed with the next one, that this is the last time we see Julia,
Right.
So what about highlights for you on this? I mean, for me, I think, it, like I said, it was a good continuation. I think the graphics were just absolutely on par with the first one. You still had the lightning didn't look any better or any worse.
Right.
With it. And like I said, it was other than you can tell, it was a different female Cenobite. Other than that, I think it was just a good continuation highlight. Yeah, I mean, it was still pretty gory. I like some gore. I love the practical effects, and the practical effects, other than, flat matte painting and Leviathan, didn't look particularly good. But yeah, overall, the special effects were still on par for everything.
Yeah, they showed that matte painting a lot.
Yeah.
Like they showed it several times.
Well, they paid some good money for a large painting like that.
I guess so.
What about highlights for you?
I mean, for me, it's just, all the kind of extra stuff in hell, like, all just the atmosphere that was down there. Like you said, there's all the different rooms, and, you get to see like, the different, like Cenobites and how they're like created, and, how they can like, go in and out of the regular world and like stay in their kind of hell world. Right. Those are the highlights. Mark.
All right. What about low points? For me, I find it odd that the number of bodies that Julie needed, and that she got her original skin back. She was more formed than Frank was, right? She just needed skin. Frank needed a lot more, but he only needed like 3 or 4 guys altogether.
Well, I mean, to be fair, when Frank came back the first time, he only had blood from the cut on the guy's hand. So it was a very small amount of blood. To where when Julia came out the first time, she literally had a whole person worth of blood.
Of course, it also makes sense. She was only skinned, and Frank was pulled apart. Maybe that has something to do with it,
right.
Too.
Well, I mean, not like that, but Julia had literally just died like the day before. It was like she was very, very fresh. So, there's not. And like when they showed her on that mattress, she was skinned, sure, but she was still whole.
Right.
So yeah, I think there's a lot of factors that put it in there to where that was, and it was like fairly obvious that she was wearing like a suit.
The was it Skinny, whoever the guy that wore it in the 80s, 90s, that wore like the suit of the body organs and stuff like that? You know what I'm talking about?
No.
Okay. Might have been after your time. Well, what about low points for you?
Low points. I mean, this movie, I don't know. I mean, the doctor kind of got annoying after a while.
Yeah.
I mean, he was just kind of overblown. Like he was like a brand new Cenobite, and somehow he was like more powerful than everybody else, which was an odd. I mean, I guess not. I mean, maybe Leviathan gave him more power because he wanted him to take over or something. Like, I mean, it's, I don't know how to describe that, but I don't know. I mean, overall, I think it was pretty good. I mean, I don't think that you'd be able to put on someone else's skin that fast.
Yeah.
I mean, clothes and all. I mean, she was everything in like what, maybe 30 seconds.
Yes. Yeah. So kind of like the final battle be your low point.
Sure.
That's fair. That's fair. All right, I'll start on the limit configurations on this scale. Not it's not as good as the first one. It's still okay. I'd probably just going to bring it down to 8 limit configurations out of 10.
Yeah, I can agree with that. I'll probably also go 8.
You go from 10 to 8.
Yeah, 10 to 8. I mean, it's not as good as the first one, but there's still a lot of good stuff there.
Right.
So yeah, overall, I would say it holds up very well. It's a very good sequel to a good movie.
Yeah, I mean, I think they should be watched together, quite honestly.
Yeah, I mean, again, it takes place like the next day,
right?
So it's just a continuation,
right? Yeah. All right, I will go into our next movie, Hellraiser 3 or Hell on Earth. Now I'll say something off very quickly on about it. It is very 90s. Number 2 was 80s. Like, this takes a hard direction, I think, in the 90s. I think it's very definitive 90s movie. So kind of the synopsis of this movie is, we see a kind of an introduction of of his name's Captain Elliot Spencer, who is Pinhead. I believe we see him start to get made, and I think we get a little bit more background of him, and we kind of get realize that the Pinhead's human form is trapped in limbo, and along with the puzzle box. And we get this kind of weird, out of place pillar of souls that have, Pinhead's face, and I think a couple other Cenobites' face. And we see a guy who owns a nightclub by the pillar, and he starts just to kind of mess with it. Then we're introduced to kind of the protagonist of the story. It's a television reporter, and she's kind of get a little brief synopsis that she gets these weird kind of one-off stories. She's not getting the big news stories. And she's in a hospital, and she sees someone come in with essentially the hooks attached to him that would come out of the lament configuration. And they start to go through there, and we see him kind of get pulled apart by the chains, as we would see in any other Hellraiser movie. And then the reporter finds a woman who was with the guy and starts to explain that the chains came from the box, and she had pulled it from the pillar that the club owner happened to have. we start investigating the backgrounds. She's working with her camera guy, and we do get a brief, going over trying to uncover the box and the limit configuration and what it does. That we see a videotape of Kirsty, just a brief cameo appearance, explaining the box exists, and that's how Pinhead can come back from hell, or this is his doorway to it. The club owner brings a woman back. Have, I think, the sex scene that Clive Barker always wanted in the movie. They have that in this movie. And then hooks come out of the pillar and drag this woman into the pillar and kind of absorbs the body into the pillar. And then Pinhead's face, like it's a collage of faces on like a rotating pillar, starts speaking to the owner and says, "Hey, I need you to bring me more bodies, more souls in return for power and, all the pleasure the guy could possibly want." So the reporter starts having dreams about, I believe, her father and like a war and how he potentially died. I think maybe that's where I got the pilot came from. But in her dreams, she starts seeing Pinhead in his human form, and he starts telling her about his experience, that without him, he was the human soul part of Pinhead, and without him, Pinhead is 100% evil and doesn't have to adhere to any rules. So she starts talking about discussing this stuff. She tells her now seemingly roommate, who the woman that she met, kind of moves with her and kind of starts, they become friends. And at some point, her friend believes that she's just using her for fame and fortune to get ahead in the news feed. And so she was the ex-girlfriend of the club owner, and she goes back to him and hey, he's very abusive to her, very chauvinistic, very womanizing guy. So she gets fed. The girl gets fed to Pinhead, and essentially, there's Pinhead's now set free. He's out of the pillar and is able to roam the earth. That's how we get Hell on Earth for the title, I believe. And he starts going to the club owners. I think he lives above the club and kind of goes down and starts killing just everyone in the club. And none of them open the box or anything like that. So he is wreaking pure havoc, and he doesn't have the constraints that he previously had. The reporter goes there and finds out. She hears the news. This is goes there. Pin's trying to get the box from her, and he realizes that he can't do this by himself. So he starts creating new Cenobites, and we'll get into the Cenobites of this movie when we get to that part of this discussion. So they're trying to just go after her. They go around killing people, wreaking havoc. There's CDs flying, killing people. I believe there's, I have to say, strings or ropes that are killing people. The reporter tries to go to the church, go to the police, saying, "Help me, this is happening. I have the only thing that can stop him." Pinhead appears in the church and actually kills, I believe, kills the priest or tries to kill the priest. Saying there is no God, blah blah blah. And so they trap her at a construction site, and Pinhead's saying, "Hey, you have to give this to me." And she realizes that she's able to solve she wants to solve the puzzle box and send them back to hell, because that's where she believes that this is possible. Kind of goes back into limbo, where she thought her dad gives the box, and it turns out to be Pinhead. Pinhead starts to prepare to transform her into a Cenobite. They're back. She flashes back to the construction site that she's at. and she's able to turn the box into a dagger, and was able to then stab Pinhead and essentially send him back to hell. But kind of before that, you see the spirit of Pinhead's human form say, "Hey, we have to be together. I realize that this has to be this way. No matter what I have to do, you can't be just free to do whatever you want." So he merges back with himself. So he gets part of the humanity part, and then goes back to hell. And then the reporter buries the box in the configuration in somehow fresh concrete that's sitting there at 1 a.m. in the morning. And that's kind of the last of the box that we see, but we see the building that's being built there, and it looks like the box, and like it's on its walls and its configuration and everything like that. So that's kind of how we end the movie. We have this big kind of, I don't want to say cliffhanger, but like a next big step that we could possibly get to in the franchise. So, have you seen this movie before, or did you skip number 2 somehow?
Well, I always, again, I assumed I had watched it when people described it. When I looked at it, I was like, "Oh yeah, I saw this."
Right.
But no, I saw 3. I've seen 4 too before. But no, yeah, I saw this. I've seen it a couple times, I think.
Okay.
Back around the time it came out in the 90s.
Yeah, early 90s. So what were your first thoughts about this movie? Did you feel like me this is kind of like a weird departure, or do you think it's a natural progression of the storyline?
I mean, I think it was a progression from, where it was to where, they wanted to go, where they just wanted to kind of go all out. All the rest of them were kind of centered, around like a house or a mental hospital. It didn't really go out into the world. It didn't show you like what it could do if it goes wrong and ends up in the world. And I think that's just what they wanted to show. I think they wanted it to be a grander spectacle than it was in the first 2. And I think that's why they went with the whole Hell on Earth title. And I think that's why they went with the whole let Pinhead kill everybody.
Right. And and maybe this is a reason why that Cenobites are forming humans, that they can't just do this. It'd be really, really bad. There has to be structure. There has to be laws and rules in place. We saw, essentially, I'll use the pun, very intended, Pinhead Unchained. Right. And, we got the house. We went to hell. We saw, Cenobites walking the earth, free to do whatever they want. This is probably only the second or third time for me watching this. I mean, like I said, it was like very, very 90s, very apparently 90s. It has, that feel to it. But overall, I don't think it's a horrible movie. To me, like, if rewatching it, I know that like Wishmaster came out like 5 years later. It felt very, especially the pillar, seemed very Wishmaster-ish to me. It's just that I don't think they really explained the pillar, though.
Or is Wishmaster Hellraiser?
Maybe this one, Hellraiser, yes.
There you go.
So, let's get into the Cenobites.
Well, yeah, in this one, there's like a whole new cast of them. Like yes. He decides when he gets out in the club, he makes, he turns the DJ guy into like CD head who like throws CDs, but his head is like stuck with all CDs. He looks like he's got like a CD mohawk and stuff. It's
right.
It's goofy looking, but yeah. So there's CD head Cenobite. Then there was like the cameraman who was the journalist's like cameraman buddy,
right?
Who he turned into a Cenobite and he just like made his one eyeball like a big camera. Yep. And like his power was kind of not that great because he had to like get up next to somebody and then he would say like, "Are you ready for your close up?" And then he would like shoot his camera eye like through their head, but he had to be like right next to him to do that.
Yeah.
So it was very short-sighted Cenobite. Whereas like CD Man could at least throw his CDs.
Right. And they also had I guess he's Piston Head with the weird pipes.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, I don't know where that those pipes came from. It was the club owner guy, and they just stuck these pipes in his head, and they just kind of gyrate against his head.
Yeah.
I think it was supposed to simulate how he was all about sex or whatever, right? So now he's constantly getting his head pounded.
Yeah,
I think that was what they were going for.
Right.
But yeah, it's just kind of goofy. He only really shows up for that one little section. He's not one of the main ones, walking down the street trying to kill people. That's Camera Head and CD Head.
But that was a Camera Head that was able to shoot a rocket out of his face? Or was that Piston Head?
Was it? I don't know. Maybe it must have been a Camera Head, because Piston Head didn't really do anything. He didn't show up until later.
Yeah.
When they were at that construction site, and he didn't really do much. He was just there.
Yeah.
And so was the girl, the roommate girl. She ended up being a Cenobite. She looked kind of like a dollar store version of the female Cenobite from the first.
Except she had a cigarette in her neck hole.
Right. Well, I mean, the female Cenobite in the first one smoked through the neck hole, so that's not new. It just she looked like a crappier version. Like I said, she looked like the dollar store version of it.
That's fair. I mean, do you feel like the Cenobites were very 90s though?
I mean,
would you consider it to be the modern pleasure and pain Cenobites?
I mean, at that time, obviously CDs are outdated now,
right?
But when Hellraiser first came out, they would have been futuristic,
right?
Right?
Yeah.
They were technically out at that point, but you had to be rich to have them,
right?
Yeah. Sure. Again, the Camera Head guy, I don't know.
I'm saying for that time frame though, it was I think it was just the idea of we're creating the modern Cenobites with today's, at that time, technology and the pleasure of the human world, and who we don't know really how old the Cenobites were previously. Obviously, Pinhead was at least 40 years of being Pinhead, and we don't know anyone else before them necessarily.
Well, if he did it during World War I, he would have done it before 1919.
Okay, so
it would have been at least 60 years.
Yeah.
In the first one, yeah.
Right. I mean, how do you think they stacked up though to the other ones? I'll call the original Cenobites.
The OG Cenobites?
Yes.
I thought they were. Obviously they have more free reign to do whatever they wanted because they were just murdering people in the street. But I think if Butterball was able to murder people in the street, I think he would have done a much better job.
Right. I don't disagree. I would have liked to see, Chatterbox do something.
Well, yeah, but because these guys were they just got made Cenobites literally an hour before they went on their rampage. So I think a Cenobite that had been around for a few centuries or at least decades or something, I think they would have done a lot more damage.
But here's the question: would those Cenobites have not followed the rules? Or do you think because the rule breaker Pinhead made these that they didn't care and didn't know about the rules at all?
Well, again, at this point in time, yeah, Pinhead wasn't following the rules at all.
Right.
And I think since he made the Cenobites, yeah, they also don't have to follow rules. Because they essentially alluded to the fact that the way that she kind of freed him or told him about his previous life in the second movie, it kind of set him free to where he didn't have to follow Hell's rules anymore.
Yeah.
But in doing so, separated, his halves.
Right.
And so one half became just ultra evil, one half became his normal self. But yeah, so this is the ultra evil half just murdering whatever it can because somebody let him out.
Right.
Because he essentially was Frank in the floor, right?
Yeah.
In that pillar.
Right.
They had to throw blood at him to let him come back and come out. He was just much better at it. So it only took a couple of bodies for him to get back and be totally whole again.
Right.
Well, because it's his game. He made,
right. Yeah.
he was playing the game, so he knows how to play it. So yeah, it only took a couple bodies for him to get out.
Yeah. Oh, highlights. Let's highlights it. You know, what highlights would you say there were for you in this movie?
Highlights is just all the deaths. I mean, there's just so many deaths in this movie. I mean, it really is like it's almost like a mini apocalypse. Like they're kill all the people in the club. They're just like killing people down the street. I mean, it's like, yeah, I don't know how they didn't, kind of play off of they should have had a sequel where they were like talking about what happened. Right. I thought that would have been cool. But yeah, I mean, just like all the crazy stuff that they do. And again, I think it was just all the stuff that they had to hold back on before.
Yeah.
And now they just do whatever they want.
Right. And I still like that. The highlight for me, would be the lack of, still, once again, not really much computer graphics, because they weren't particularly good in that time frame. But yeah, I mean, they were still very, for it being the 90s, I think we started seeing away from some of these practical effects that we saw in the 80s. And I like that they still held to that for this.
Mm-hmm.
Low points. I don't know. I kind of wish, they would have continued the story with Kirsty, because realistically, I think this was kind of a starting of a change, where we start getting different Cenobites, we start getting different leads in the franchise at this point. So to me, that'd be the low point, is because of that. Like, we start seeing that pivot. I wouldn't say become generic, but you know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah.
It seemed like a departure from the first two.
The beginning of the end is what you're trying to say.
Right, yeah. What about low points for you?
Low points would be in the scene where he is killing everyone in the club. There is this goofy, bizarre scene where he takes the ice from one of the cups and it like jumps up out of the cup and floats in midair and somehow forms itself into his own face. And then he said, I don't even remember the line, because I was like, my eyes were rolling so far back in my head that I don't even remember what he said. But he said some stupid one-liner and then became like an ice knife and stabbed the person in the head.
Yeah.
It was so stupid looking. It was like just so bizarre. Like, everybody else died from hooks and chains and blood and explosions. And it's just this one bizarre, like it must have been some like FX guy's like baby where he's like, "Ooh, I'm going to make a ice knife," or something. It's just so out of place and so stupid looking because it's like CGI and it looks terrible.
Yeah.
Because it's like early 90s CGI and it's not good. It's just very out of place, very stupid looking, very bad. And that's the very low point. It cringes every time I see it.
Would you say a highlight for this would be the music? The soundtrack's pretty
Armored
good.
Saint. Well, Armored Saint was the name of the band that was in the club. It's a fake band, but they were like real music. I would say, the Motorhead song Hellraiser is from this movie. Like the video has scenes from this movie in it.
Yeah.
And that song's pretty great. So.
We have them. We also have KMFDM in the soundtrack.
Yeah.
Armored Saint apparently is a real band.
Well, it might have been after the movie. I think they made it for the movie.
That's entirely possible. So, the music was pretty good. Like, as soon as the credits go, I'm like, oh, that's Motorhead. Okay, that's pretty cool. I like that. All right. What about number of lament configurations for you on this?
Number of lament configurations for Hellraiser 3 Hell on Earth, I would say... And this is just based on where this franchise goes. I would say a 7. It's going to be a 7 out of 10 lament configurations.
Yeah, I agree with 7.
Because, it's still good. It's obviously not as good as the first two, but it's still good. It's got some fun stuff. There's some goofy, cringy stuff, but it's mostly just from the time period.
Yeah. So I'm not sure this is a necessary rewatch with the rest.
No, not really. I mean, if you really, really liked the first two, sure.
Yeah, that's fair. All right, you want to go into Hellraiser 4, Bloodlines?
Hellraiser 4 Bloodlines, directed by the great Alan Smithy.
Yes, we got our first Alan Smithy.
Should I give the background?
Let's give background on Alan Smithy for those who don't know who Alan Smithy is.
Yeah, Alan Smithy is basically the name given to a movie, like the directed by Alan Smithy, is if the director essentially wants to disown the movie. If the director wants to disown the movie, he petitions the Directors Guild if he can please take his name off of it. And then if they give him the permission, they say, okay, and then they credit it as Alan Smithy so that the people watching don't necessarily know that, the director wants to disown this movie, but everyone in the industry knows, oh, okay, something bad happened.
I can tell you when I saw that, I'm like, oh no.
Yeah, and it was basically the original director. He had a vision. This was actually pitched with Clive Barker. Clive Barker was involved with the script. He wasn't involved in much of the movie making itself, but he was involved with the script. He wasn't involved with the pitch. He actually pitched this movie to the studio, and that's why they picked it up. And apparently, what happened is while they were filming it, because Clive Barker was not involved in that. When they were filming it, the studio kind of panicked because they're like, oh, this is not going to do, well because, whatever, all these reasons why. So they brought in, they wanted to do reshoots. And so the director was like, no, I don't want to do the reshoots. He was like exhausted at that time. And he's like, I don't want to do reshoots. So they brought in another director. And not only did they do reshoots, they literally rebuilt the movie. They reshot things to totally change storylines and stuff. And then when the director actually saw what he did, he immediately was like, yeah, I want to disown this movie.
Right.
This is not the movie. Not necessarily because it was bad, because this was not the movie that he made. This was a totally different movie.
The question is, was it the reshoots that made it? Let's call it what it is, Hellraiser in space.
No, it was always that part was always there, but there was a lot more to what was going on.
Right.
The plot is essentially it jumps all over the place, but when we start off in space in the far future, right?
Yes.
So there's space cop kind of people pulling up to a space station. The space station, I mean, the first time I saw this movie, I was immediately that's the box, right? I was like, that's the box, unfolded, because I know what an unfolded box looks like. I put together many cardboard boxes. That's what it looks like. I immediately knew what it was. Anyway, so in the rewatch, I double immediately knew. I was like, yeah, of course it's the box. Everybody knows that.
Yeah.
So the space cops pull up to the space station, which looks like an unfolded box. They find out that there's only one guy left. Everybody else is gone. The guy is not responding to them, and they have to break in. Now we cut inside the space station, and there's some dude, weird looking shaved head. It looks like it's falling apart inside of there, right? It's all old and sparking, and doesn't look like a very well maintained space station.
Right.
And so we see this android doing the lament configuration on the box. So yeah, it opens up the box. Pinhead comes out, right? Pinhead and some of the Cenobites come out, but they're trapped in a room, he made a vault kind of thing, and that this android opened up the box in the vault. And so they're kind of trapped in there, but then they kind of cut to the cops come in there and they're like, oh, we got you. Right?
Yeah.
So then they go to it's an interrogation room. And he's not talking to anybody. And there's one chick cop comes in there and she's like, oh, let me try. So she goes in there and she's talking and he's like, okay, well, I can tell you the story, but I'm going to have to start at the beginning. And she's like, okay, well, we'll start at the beginning. So then, doodle-doo, flashback. We go back to the 1700s, right?
Yep.
So where his ancestor, it's played by the same actor, his ancestor is a toy maker in, whatever,
France.
17th century, 18th century, whatever it is.
Yeah.
It's old timey France with the, the powdered face and the powdered wigs and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, so he like finishes this box, which is the box, right? So this toy maker makes this box that was commissioned by this rich guy. So he goes to the, his house in the middle of the night to give him this box when he completes it. So he goes to the house, he gives him the box, and for some reason, like, sticks around and is like peeking through the window. And of course, there's like some old weird aristocrat dude, and then there's Adam Scott. The Adam Scott is like his little kind of helper guy, right? His like protege kind of person. So, they're like, had already like set up this like demon summoning thing, right? They like the circle with the blood and all this stuff. They got all the chains and the hooks hanging from the ceiling, and they like had like killed and skinned like some courtesan that they had picked up, right? And so they have the skin like hanging from the hooks in the middle of the room. And so they use the box to summon this demon. The demon comes in, goes into the skin and becomes this woman. They summon this demon. Angelique is her name, and they basically say like, oh yeah, the demon has to do whatever we tell it to do because we summoned it, right? And the only time that it won't is if you get in the way of hell, right? Is what they say. Right. He's like, what does that mean? And he doesn't know, but he's like, you can't get in the way.
That's the one rule.
Essentially, is the rule. Right? Yeah, they don't go into that. Whatever. The dude gets caught peeping on him. He sees the box. He goes in to try to steal the box back because it's like his, whatever, magnum opus or whatever. So he wants to get the box back. So he goes in to get the box, and he sees like the aristocrat guy is like basically dead. And then Adam Scott and the demon Angelique are like, going to town on the bed. So he goes in there thinking that this aristocrat guy is dead. He goes to grab the box. The aristocrat guy is not dead. He gets up and grabs him and makes noise. They find him. They start torturing him and stuff. His wife, the toy maker's wife, shows up to try to find out where he is. Sees him, dying or whatever. He gets out long enough to tell her, get out of here. Bad things are happening. You need to leave. Here's the box. Get out of here.
Right.
And so then we cut to modern day. So it cuts from 18th century France, and then we cut to modern day, like 1995 or whatever year it's supposed to be.
Right, 95, 96-ish.
Right. So 95, 96. So this is the descendant of the toy maker is now an architect. And as kind of suggested from the third movie, where the box got put in the concrete, and then they showed that kind of like skyscraper with the box kind of, panels on the wall and stuff. Right. So essentially that is like a real building. So this architect makes this building. He's kind of like a celebrated architect. Everybody loves this work that he's done. That's great. So he gets put in a magazine, like an article in a magazine, like he gets put on the cover of whatever, like Time magazine, whatever it is. So for doing this great skyscraper, right? He's like, the new future of architecture. So we cut back over to France, and Angelique and Adam Scott are still around. They're obviously dressed in modern day clothes. Adam Scott looks like he's a very, very heavy alcoholic. Like he does not look well.
Right.
But obviously he's like, his life has been extended by the demon in some way, right? And she's like, oh, we should go and get this is like, it looks like the toy maker's descendant. We should go to the US to get him, right? To figure out what's going on, to get him to build us another box or to get the box back, whatever. And he's like, no, I don't want to do that. And she's like, are you sure? And he's like, no, I don't want to do that. So then she kills him because he got in the way of hell, right? That was him refusing her wanting to do something bad. And so essentially, he fails. He gets killed. So she goes to the U.S. by herself. She kind of seduces her way in there. She's kind of manipulating the guy, and then she ends up manipulating the security guards to get into the building. She finds the box that was in the concrete, which before it was like a concrete slab on the ground, but this time it ends up as like a concrete like pillar or something.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, she gets it out. She convinces this guy, through her seduction techniques that, oh, this is a fun, sex game. Open the box.
Right.
So he opens the box. Pinhead comes out. That guy is dead, but now, Pinhead obviously knows her, right? Because she's from hell, but she's been out of hell for a couple of centuries.
Wasn't she a princess of hell?
Yeah, he calls her princess, but yeah, she was like obviously some kind of high-ranking person in hell. And they go into it a little bit, but not really. A lot of it you have to kind of like read into. Is essentially like, since she's been gone from hell for so long, she doesn't know how hell works anymore, right? She was from an older version of hell, to where they were all about like temptation. And they tempt people to do things, but the people have to make the choice to do the bad things themselves, right? So like, yeah, they can goad them along and tempt them, but they can't make them do it. So where like Pinhead's version of hell is just murder everybody.
Yeah.
Right? If they want, the pain and suffering in any way that you can give it to them, that's what you're going to do. They followed the rule of you had to be summoned first, but it looks like at this point, they don't even follow that rule anymore. They just kind of kill whoever, right? As soon as they're unleashed, they just kill whoever until they're put back.
Right.
So they're doing that. And they kind of team up, right? Because they find out that, she finds out as she's seducing this guy that there was another design that the toy maker came up with after he figured out that this box was going to summon a demon. He figured out this is a new design that is going to be able to kill the box and all the demons involved, right? And he called it the Elysium configuration.
Right.
And it's like this bizarre looking, it kind of looks like a box, but like the sides are all separated and there's like lightning in the middle or something.
Yeah, like a big swirl of light.
Right. Yeah. It's not a very good diagram. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But anyway, so he still has this design, hundreds of years later, he still has this design. So she knows that this is a threat to them because obviously if this goes on, like hell dies, they all die. So like her and Pinhead kind of team up. There's like a weird kind of like a weird sexual tension going on between them kind of thing. Like it's a weird kind of situation. Like they're helping each other, but you can tell they don't like each other. But then sometimes they're like this weird tension between them. It's an interesting relationship.
The enemy of my enemy.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So they're basically trying to work together to make sure that they kill this guy, to make sure that he can't build this Elysium configuration, because he's trying to build this computer program that can make this actually a reality, right?
Yeah.
They're scared of that, so they want to kill him. She's trying to like use her old ways of temptation and manipulation and seduction to try to get what she wants. And Pinhead is just straight up trying to kill him. And then when he can't kill him, he's like, he captures his wife and his kid, and he's like, threatening to kill them if he doesn't give himself up and all this stuff. It's goofy stuff. Of course, there's Cenobites involved, which are different in this. We'll get into that in a minute. They don't really do much. They're just kind of there for flavor. But so basically, they stop them. The computer program thing fails to work. They kind of, work together, and Pinhead ends up eventually, winning and killing him, blah, blah, whatever. It's done, but the wife ends up closing the box. And so Pinhead goes back to hell. So Angelique and Pinhead go back to hell. And then, of course, that's when we go back to the future, which I think that is like 2127 or something.
Something like that. It's like I think it's like 200 years between each thing.
Right. And that's when we find out that this space station, which again, the first second I saw it, I knew it was an unfolded box, is a big box that's essentially going to contain, they're going to have the box, and that's why he summoned Pinhead and all the other Cenobites, is because he's going to bring them inside the box, and then he finally perfected his ancestor's design of this Elysium configuration. And that's what the space station is going to do. It's going to fold up into the Elysium configuration. It's going to kill Pinhead and all the Cenobites and the box and everything. It's all going to go away, and the portal to hell is going to be
closed,
destroyed. Right. So of course the cops are tricked by Pinhead, and they open up the door to the vault. So they get out. So they're walking around the space station, killing all the space cops that are there. And they're kind of moving closer to, the guy and the lady cop who were like interviewing. At this point, the lady cop believes him, right?
Yeah.
She's like, okay, so how do we get this done? So she helps him, eventually, get the Elysium configuration configured. Okay, they're going to do that. Pinhead thinks he's got him cornered. And then as he goes to kill him, he finds out it's like a hologram, and they're actually like on a ship that's already gone. And so then while they're already gone, they activate the Elysium configuration, and then everybody gets vaporized, and happy ending.
Yes. So,
did I miss anything?
No, that's pretty straightforward. I mean, that's it.
There's three. It's a little confusing because there's three separate storylines, but at least they separate them well enough to at least they don't jump between them too often. So
right, and the guy who plays a descendant every single time, the same guy, which I guess I can see them doing. What was I going with that? He's able to have dreams of former ancestors. Like he was, keeping the paper. He was having dreams. He had a dream of the first ancestor that we see, right? And so they know they have to continue it. And it seems like the third guy who's in space knows all of that as well. Like he also has the same visions of the Elysium and of the puzzle and stuff like that. So it seems to be every 200 years, one of the descendants in the bloodline knows about that and tries to do something about it.
That's fair. Sounds right.
So, what are your first thoughts on this? Was this your first time seeing it?
No, I had seen it right around when it came out. I mean, I didn't see it in the theater or anything.
Yeah.
I saw it on video. Like I said, I think I saw it probably the same time I saw the third
one.
Because I was like, oh, let me watch it. At this time, again, I was like, oh, I know I've seen the first one. I know I've seen the second one. I'm going to watch the third one. Because, again, I thought I had seen the second one, which I did not.
Right.
Anyway, so I watched the third one and the fourth one. I've seen it before. I mean, I liked it. I mean, I like the way that it jumps between the different timelines and stuff. I thought it was interesting because it was, putting that sci-fi spin on Hellraiser, which at that time I didn't think they were ever going to do, right? Because Hellraiser doesn't really fit into a science fiction kind of world.
Right.
I guess most of these horror franchises really don't, and they're kind of forced and shoehorned in. That's why they always say the space one is the worst. But, again, I think this one's better than a lot of the other space ones out there. But I thought it was good. It's a kind of different way of telling the story from the first three, but because it's basically all about, the background in the story, which in the first one, it was just kind of suggested, they never said where the box came from or what it was. You just assumed it was a tool of the demons, right?
Right.
But this one goes into all that. So you get a lot of lore and background in this one, which I like.
Right. I said I couldn't tell you when. I said I probably saw this about 2000, 2001 for the first time. Rewatch. It's okay. I think, as we discussed before, why does everything go to space? I feel that Event Horizon was a better Hellraiser in space than this was. It was weird. I don't know. I've never explained how Adam Scott, who was a human, was able to stay alive for 200 years.
Well, I'm guessing the demon,
he was tethered to the demon,
drinking her blood or something. I don't know. I'm sure there was something that he asked her to do, or that because he had a pet demon. Again, it's something like that. But again, that. He was alive for 200 years or whatever, but that was mostly time skip and then he died in the very first scene that he was in the future. So it doesn't matter that much.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, when I saw this first time, I didn't know who Adam Scott was.
No, not at all. I mean, I had no idea either.
And now I rewatched it, I'm like, oh, he's actually in this almost more than Pinhead.
Well, yeah. But no, yeah, he's in. I mean, that whole plot line in Paris in the 18th century, he's a major character.
Right. So let's get into the lore then, right? So we kind of see the origins of the lament configuration. How did you feel about the lore and the origin of the box? Do you think it was like we finally got answers that we've been asking for the past 3 movies?
Well, you got some answers, but they never really answer what the box is doing or what, because a toy maker just made a puzzle box, right? And then he gave it to them and they immediately used it to raise a demon.
Well, did they use the box?
How does that
was he using the box as an easier way of summoning and trapping the demon?
Right, he was, but that's what I'm saying. How would they know that? I mean, again, they never go into where he got the idea from, or if the toy maker just made this and they used it. I mean, again, they don't really explain any of that. They just say the box is used to summon the demon, and that's it. That's all they say.
I took it as they summon the demon in the box, because you see the box during the summoning ritual. You see the box go through its steps, like it was triggered from the vibration, and so therefore it was accidentally got incorporated into the spell. That's the way I viewed it.
Well, again, it's like they knew what it was going to do, and they told him that he was now cursed for making it.
Yeah.
But they never went into who came up with the design to do that? Who knew how to summon a demon with a box, and who did he know innately how to make it? Is it? I mean, whatever. They didn't go into. There's a lot of questions that were unanswered for me, at least in that part. But yes, this is the origin of the box. This is who created it and why.
Now, what do you think of them going? I mean, for 115 years from that, we won't be alive when this takes place. But I mean, how do you feel about it going that far into the future? Do you think it could have stopped in 1996 and not gone that far forward?
I mean, it could have, but I think at that point, I think there was probably 2 reasons. One was probably they wanted to make some more sequels, right? And you can't make a sequel for something that you ended. Well, I mean, you can, but it's cheap. If you have to keep bringing them back from, the beyond, it gets cheapened over time, right? So it's just everybody just expects he's never going to be dead because you can't kill him, right? He just keeps coming back no matter what.
All you do is send him to hell temporarily.
Right. So I think they wanted this final death to be the end, but they wanted to leave a lot more room to have stories in between there, right? Because when he kills him and then gets sent back to hell in 96, he doesn't come back into that story until 2020 or 21-27, which all kinds of stuff could have happened between there because obviously the box still existed.
Right.
So we don't know where it was or who was using it or why in between there. So there's plenty of room for that. And I think the second one was they just wanted to have a cool set piece to put it in space because they were trying to think of a way to contain everything inside of a box, and they're like, "Oh, space station would be able to do it." And there you go, bam, bam.
Right. Now, do you feel that the Cenobites are timeless? That when they get called, it's no time passes for them. So for Pinhead, it just seemed like 3 separate days in a row.
Well. I mean, yeah. When you look at it, he was an officer of World War I, right? And that was his age in World War I. And then when he got zapped back to being a normal person again, 70 years later, he looked exactly the same. So yeah, no time passes for them. The hell is a timeless dimension,
right?
Yeah. So I mean, yeah. I don't think any time passed at all. I mean, I think they probably got summoned back and forth a lot of times between there, and they probably had, doing whatever they do, in hell parties or whatever in between there. It just doesn't age them. It just doesn't, the time doesn't mean what it means to us.
Now, do you feel this stepped on the toes of the lore that we established that Pinhead's able to do whatever he feels like and not have rules?
I mean, kind of. I think they tried to steer it back a little bit, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, in the third one, to be fair, he didn't come out of the box. Someone didn't summon him the first time. Like, he was stuck in that pillar and he had to come back like Frank with blood and shit like that. And when he came back, he was, again, just the evil part of him. The other half wasn't there. So, I mean, yeah, that explains why he was so crazy in the third one. But at the end of it, he does get put back in hell, both halves.
Right.
So in this one, he comes back with at least some of the old rules.
Yeah.
Right? But I think, that experience made him a bit more unhinged. I think in the first and second one, he was fucked up and he would murder people and do horrible things to them. But I think he had that sense of honor, right? Like, again, hearts, not hands. We're called by people who desire, pleasure and pain or whatever. We don't, not just because somebody solved the box. So whereas the franchise moves forward, it's like whoever, if anybody touches the box, they're immediately murdered, right? So I'd like it. I mean, it's a change over time, but again, with all the changes that happen in the third one, it makes sense that he's a little bit unhinged in the later one.
Right. So, highlights though, highlights for me, I'm not sure I have very many highlights. Like, we're starting to get into the 90s graphics with the CG. I guess the highlight would be it is logically the next step of if you want to call it cliffhanger from the third one. What about for you?
I mean, I liked it. I mean, I liked with a lot of the lore that came back up, how they had the time breaks between, like when it was created to like, a kind of middling, present day so that people can get, at least, involved in it at the present day time and then in the future, because obviously I love sci-fi stuff, but I thought they did a good job with holding it together. I really would like to see what they would have done with the original script, because the original script sounded a lot more interesting.
Yeah, the movie that never was.
Correct.
What about low points for you?
At low points is really just knowing what was cut out of the movie. And just knowing that there could have been so much more, I think is really the low point to me.
Points for me, like I said, the graphics were pretty bad. I'm not sure, the story was as good as it could have been. Definitely not as strong, and kind of why this was the last one released even in theaters at this point. As we discussed lore and background and stuff in the past, and I guess some of the mystery is still there with the box, but I guess they get okay-ish explaining it, but they need, I think, more explanation. Honestly,
there could have been more to it, but I mean, also, there's so much more going on, like in the hell politics that they just touched on.
Yeah.
In this, that they never really went back to.
Right.
Like, this is the last we see of like any of the real lore or any of the like interesting things or politics. Obviously there's a couple more I still have to watch.
Yeah.
But so far there's been nothing.
Now we did Cenobites for this one though.
Mm-hmm.
We had Pinhead.
Yep.
Who else did we have?
The Twisty Twins.
We did get the Twisty Twins, didn't they? Where they're like the cops in the 90s, or the security guards, not the cops, that were twins, and then their heads got pulled and then twisted and then twisted together.
Right.
And then was this one with the Hell Dog? The Cenobite dog. That was pretty much it.
Well, Angelique in the future storyline did come out as a Cenobite. So where she had, hold on a second. Oh, that was Angelique in the future. She had like, her head was like, they cut like the skin of her head and then it was like peeled back with like those guitar strings to her shoulders.
Yeah.
So she was like a Cenobite, but only in the future. In the past and in the present storyline, she was like a normal looking person, but in the future, she definitely looks like a Cenobite.
Yeah. Was it because she went back to hell?
Right.
That was her, that was her true form versus being a demon possessing a human body that they had.
Right.
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah, because at the end of the present storyline, the wife closed the box and they went back to hell.
So she got removed from the human body that she was using.
Right.
All right. Limit configurations for me, I'm going to go down to a 6 for this franchise at this point for this movie.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I'd probably be on board with the 6.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's again, it's not the greatest, but I mean, considering where we'll go from here, it's
watchable. It's watchable,
right?
Definitely.
Yeah, but again, I really would want to see the original cut of this movie and all this. The original cut was like the Angelique and Pinhead were like almost at war. There was like an aggressive fight between them. It was like a political fight for hell.
Right, the leader of hell, essentially.
Right. Yeah, because she was like, trying to whatever. Yeah. There's a lot more to it, but it sounded a lot more interesting. But
all right, and then this last one, we'll tag team the plot.
Okay.
Just for time's sakes. I mean, essentially, what we get is we have a detective who we see, and he uses drugs. He's not faithful to his wife. Eventually, he gets to a murder scene that he's looking at, and he discovers the puzzle box. And so he solves the box, which I don't know why they always say solve the box, but he solved the box, opened the box, and then he starts having hallucinations. We get to see these weird Cenobite women that we'll discuss a little bit more. And he starts kind of investigating the murder, where there's at each murder scene, was there a finger of a child left at the scene?
Right. Yeah. And these murders that are happening are people that are like directly related to.
Right.
So like the very first murder that he goes to is like some guy that he knew from high school, which is, I mean, it's not a close relationship, but at least he knew. And then the second one is the hooker that he hired.
Right.
He goes like, he sleeps with the hooker. He goes to work and he gets a weird phone call from the hooker where she's like screaming, "Help me," or whatever. And so he goes back to the hotel and he finds her dead in the shower.
Blood everywhere, kind of hung.
Right. Yeah. So like this is bad news. He like tries to bring his partner in, like saying, "Hey, like you knew I was at, work, like I couldn't have done this." And the partner is like, "Oh, we should tell the boss." And he convinces him not to, but kind of knows that it's going to happen anyway. So he tries to frame his partner. So like he's not a good dude.
Right. And then he starts, making connections to murders, and there's talking about the engineer, right? The engineer, this big bad overarching guy who runs all this crime, and it's just no one knows who he really is, and and anyone the cop's going to talk to, he ends up getting killed.
Right. Yeah. Like he goes to like his known snitch, right? And who's like this weird, creepy, like pedophile ice cream truck guy. I don't know,
which was
disturbing. So he has a vision that this guy dies. He knows exactly how he dies and exactly where the child's finger is going to be at the murder scene. So he goes to the murder scene and they're like, he died exactly the way they said he did. And he knew exactly where the finger would be. So at this point, they're like suggesting like, okay, like you probably killed these people. Like they're like, he's a suspect. And they're like actively like trying to accuse him of these crimes.
And he starts seeing therapy for his hallucinations, and the therapist is James. I don't know how to say the last name. It's Reamer.
Reamer.
Reamer. and he's telling all this stuff, right? He's just trying to help him explore his hallucinations, and he's kind of walking through his progress of how he's trying to find the engineer this entire time.
Right, and then he goes to like the weird cowboy poker place, which is, I don't know what was up with
weird
that,
scene.
but he was like chasing this cowboy through the forest, and then all of a sudden the cowboy wasn't there, and then he was like seeing Cenobites in the trees, and I don't know. I mean, there's just a lot of stuff that doesn't make sense that's happening. I mean, he's basically just having visions, kind of like descending the spiral of madness, kind of thing.
Right. And then we eventually he figures out that James Reamer is the engineer, that he's there, that he's the one he's been looking for, and you don't find the engineer finds you. They kept saying that like every single person is talking to you about the engineer. Right. And we find out the engineer is actually Pinhead in disguise, and kind of going through this. And you find out through this weird sequence, like he's having these dreams, like he's in the childhood. He sees his, dad abusing his mom. He shoots his dad. And like he goes back there as an adult, and they're back alive, and he has to kill them. And they're kind of slowly realizing that the fingers of the child are him from when he was a child.
Right.
And essentially the kind of the ending is we find out that once he opened the lament configuration, he was in hell, and he was paying for all his sins. Would you say that's a good way of describing the ending?
That's what they were trying to go for.
It's like we were slowly seeing his descent into madness, and his going through, I would say that you could say the different levels of hell, each diving deeper into the root of everything. I mean, that's really all it is. It's a very like 7-ish crime thriller, but it seems like the Cenobites and Penny were just kind of thrown in after the fact.
Yeah, it's kind of like a neo-noir like detective story is what I think probably the original script was. As I think it was like a neo-noir detective story of like some guy investigating murders that end up framing him for murders, which again, pretty cool story. I mean, I think that there was a good script in here at one point in time.
Right.
I think it just got hacked into a Hellraiser story when it wasn't. It's not a Hellraiser story.
Right. Do you think we had a little bit of the unreliable narrator in this too?
I mean, yeah, there's definitely. I mean, there's nobody is reliable in this movie. It's hard. I mean, the interesting part about it is you don't know what's going on, because like you don't know what's happening. You don't know what to believe. I mean, there's things that are happening. Like, I mean, Pinhead makes an appearance like earlier in the movie in like a dream, but he just like stands there. He doesn't. Like, nobody reacts to him.
Right.
So there's just a lot of odd stuff happening.
And I find it interesting that I saw the name of the director and writer on this, which is Scott Derrickson, who's done some pretty good things recently. He wrote Multiverse of Madness. He wrote Black Phone. He was like a script doctor for some of the Scream movies. He's a pretty bigger name or coming name in horror a little bit now than he was. This is 22 years ago, about almost to the day, 22 years ago this came out. And this is our first straight to DVD Hellraiser.
Oh, we all got to start somewhere.
So first thoughts for you.
I mean, first thoughts for me is like watching the movie, was like, this isn't a Hellraiser movie. Like, this is really not a Hellraiser movie. Again, thinking about this script, like, I think the story was a good story before they tacked on all this weird Hellraiser stuff onto it. Like, I mean, you take out the box and you take out Pinhead, and it's the same movie. I mean, it really doesn't add anything to it. It was really, it really feels like it was a script that existed before. They needed a Hellraiser movie, so they just tacked on some Hellraiser pieces onto this movie and then to film it, is what it felt like. It's not necessarily a bad movie. Like I said, I think the story is interesting, and I think the story would have been better as a standalone, probably rolling with the original script. I think it would have been much better. But again, it's not a bad story. It's just not a Hellraiser story.
Right. It almost seems like how 10 Cloverfield Lane was a Cloverfield movie, but it really wasn't until the very end.
Right.
And that's what, like, that tacking on. Like, I think 10 Cloverfield Lane was going to be its own separate thing, and then they decided to make it part of the Cloverfield universe, and that's what this movie is. It's a different psychological crime thriller with Hellraiser pinned to the end, just to make it part of a bigger universe.
Right.
I'm trying. I don't recall seeing this on my franchise. This might have come out right after I did the franchise, or I may have this might have been the last one I saw on my franchise run. I mean, some of it seems very familiar, but I don't recall it a lot. And
this is for sure the first time I've watched it.
yeah, because this is in a time frame where you kind of shied away from horror movies, the 2000-ish era,
right? Especially straight to video ones,
right?
Yes.
So the Cenobites, if you want to even call them Cenobites at this point in time, I mean, to me, they seem very, very poor. I understand it was attacked on things, so it didn't really either. But I mean, we had the twins or the two women Cenobites that had like stitched up faces, and we had Chatterbox back, but he was just a head and arms, and he would look very much like the creature from Basket Case.
Yeah,
and that's it. And Pinhead, obviously.
Right. I mean, they tried to go a little bit into like the pleasure pain thing, where they had like the twin, guitar string face ladies, sensually rubbing on him and stuff like that. But then they were like going under his skin,
pulling his heart out,
blood on her. Right. I mean, but stuff like that. I mean, they tried to go into that a little bit, but then he just like walked away from that. Like, it like didn't affect him at all. It was like, like normally when Cenobites are involved, there's like, hooks, chains, death, blood,
pain. Yeah.
People's body parts being tacked onto a spinning board. It's like not just like, oh yeah, that was great and all, but I'll see you later. Like that's not what the Cenobites are supposed to do.
How do you feel about the lore? Do you feel there's any lore that added to the Hellraiser franchise? I don't think there was.
No, there was not.
Said, it's just a descent into hell and madness.
Well, I mean, again, considering, you look at all the other movies in this series, the way that they talked about the engineer is that he was like a fixture there, right? Like people had heard of him working in the shadows for a long ass time. That's not how Pinhead works.
He was never covert.
Right. Well, and not only that, but he was called out of the box. Like he lived in hell until he was called out. He didn't live in the normal world as like a underworld mafia boss. So they kind of pushed him off as, Yeah, it was, I don't know. There's just a lot of things when you look further into it, just a lot of things don't.
Yeah. I mean, what about any highlights for you? I mean, I know you like the neo-noir aspect. I imagine that's a highlight.
Yeah, like I said. Yeah, I mean, the story itself, again, you take away the Hellraiser elements, or even with the Hellraiser elements, I guess, it's a good story. I mean, it's a fun story. Again, it wasn't particularly well acted. It wasn't particularly well executed. But I think the original script was probably a really good script because it sounded like a good story. I think if it was done better, if it was done without the tacked on Hellraiser stuff and just done as a standalone movie with better actors and a better director, I think it would have been a good movie. I think it would have been solid.
Yeah.
Because it's an original story and it's a fun story. It just, I think it just failed in the execution.
Do you think this is the movie so far in this franchise that we're at this point? This is the least amount of Pinhead?
Yeah.
I feel like it's been for 2 minutes.
I mean, yeah. I mean, yeah, like I said, there's the one part where he appears in a dream, but he doesn't say anything. and then really you don't see him until the very end.
Right. And I'm really surprised that Doug Bradley even came back. Like, why?
Well, because they probably told him, yeah, we can get all your scenes done in a day. Because that's probably about how long it took, is my guess.
Probably most of the day was putting the makeup and costume.
Right.
I mean, highlights, like I said, I agree with you that it was an interesting film noir, crime noir story that it could have been anything else, though, and not been Hellraiser. And it'd been okay. About low points, though. I mean, besides the movie.
I mean, I'm trying to... I mean, low points is, just overall quality. I know this is a straight-to-video. I'm not expecting it to be, like, high production values and stuff, but I just felt like it was poorly executed. You know what I mean? I mean, the acting wasn't particularly great. It was kind of forced and cheesy. Like, again, just everything felt kind of like loose and not very well done. Just kind of pushed out the door. It really felt like a
sci-fi TV movie, but horror.
Right. Correct. I mean, obviously there was more like gore and swearing and stuff than those movies would normally have, but it really felt like that kind of production.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with that. And like I said, the low point is the Hellraiser part. It's not Hellraiser.
Right.
So. But that's lament configurations for you out of 10.
Lament configurations out of 10. I'll give it a 5. Like 5 lament configurations out of 10. Simply because there was a good story there at some point before it was kind of butchered out, right? But it was enjoyable enough. I mean, again, where this goes is downhill from here. So like this one, looking back at this one, it feels much better than it does at some of the later ones, but we'll get into that. But yeah, as far as like looking into the future, I'll give it a 5 out of 10.
Yeah, I will definitely agree with the 5 out of 10 on this one. But yeah, I mean, this is kind of our first part of the first 5 movies of the Hellraiser franchise. We have 5 more to go, plus the reboot that comes out on the 7th of October, 2022. So yeah, we'll be recording that and putting this out relatively in the same week. Anything else you want to discuss about this first part of the Clive Barker involvement of Hellraiser?
Not really. I mean, just saying, like, yeah, it's starting to go downhill, but just a warning that it gets worse from here.
All right. Well, then stay tuned for part 2 of the Hellraiser franchise. We'll be discussing, like I said, next 5 Hellraiser movies plus the reboot / revival. We'll have to see what that is when we get to it. So until
have high hopes.
I have high hopes as well. So until then, I'm Graveyard saying, have you checked on the children?
This is Salem saying, long live the new flesh.